Hello and welcome back to Planetos podcast for episode 34. It's been ages, but we're back. We're ready to focus on some minor characters, some minor houses, some storylines that we're really fascinated with. And we continue our long march toward the Winds of Winter. Some interesting news coming out that George is still out there writing. He's in his mountain fortress writing away. So we hope that this is the year, or this is the year that an announcement will be made that the Winds of Winter is coming. With everything going on in the world, we hope that you listeners out there, your families are all doing well. And so we wanted to get back at this. It's been a while. It's been probably 4 months since we've recorded an episode, but we wanted to hop right back into it, give you all some content out there, and do something fun while we're all self-quarantining, while we're all trying to get through this mess that's happening in our country and in our world. As you may remember, I am Travis. I'm one of your hosts. You can find me at Sir_Travis on Twitter.
And I am Brett. You can find me on Twitter at HomelyPillow. Yes, we actually have a new permanent co-host added to our podcast, and you go ahead. I mean, he's been a reoccurring guest, and we just figured, it's only right, so go ahead and take it away.
Hey guys, I'm back. I am Micah. You can find me on Twitter at Micah_of Clark. I'm happy to be here as an official co-host. It's great working with you guys. We have a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Yes. So Mike has been on, I think, 3 or 4 episodes. This will be the 3rd or 4th episode. But he had a great theory that he dropped a few months ago called A Tragedy of Three Nights, which is about his theory that Hyle Hunt and Jamie will have a trial by combat granted by Laney Stoneheart. So that's a really interesting theory. Got a lot of traction on Reddit, and you heard it here first on Planetos from Micah. And Micah just has great insight into the characters, great insight into the plot and the stories. And Brett and I were talking after our previous recording that we thought Micah would make a great addition to the podcast.
And this might even be his 5th recording, because our last recording got all glitched up, and
we intended to have this episode out by the 1st of April, and there was a technical glitch, as Brett said, and so we're having to re-record this. But here we are, and we're going to talk about the Blackwoods, which is a really fascinating house in the Riverlands. They're lords of Raventree Hall. Titus Blackwood is a very memorable character. So you guys ready to talk about House Blackwood?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into it. So we're going to start off. We're going to give a little bit of historical background of House Blackwood. We'll talk about some of the historical characters. We'll then transition into the characters and the house in the main series. We'll talk about those that we know from House Blackwood. And then we'll finish off our conversation with some theorizing. We'll talk about what could happen in the Winds of Winter, what could happen in A Dream of Spring, and then some of the things that we think are interesting with this house that could portend where House Blackwood ends and what impact they have on the story going forward. So let's get right into their history. We're going to start off with some background itself on House Blackwood. And we know that their sigil, it's a really awesome sigil. It's very well known in the fandom. If you don't, you've probably seen it. But it is a flock of ravens surrounding a black shield charged with a dead weirwood tree on scarlet red. So it's very famous. It immediately invokes Blackwood's history and ties to ancient Westeros, to magic, to all that portends. And there's going to be A lot of discussion on that as we get further into this episode and as we get toward the end about their relation to the magical side of the story. Now, just real quickly, I want to share that, their sigil is black and white and red. And that to me just kind of brings up an unfinished George R. R. Martin novella about Jack the Ripper called Black and White and Red All Over. And I just think that that's kind of interesting that you begin to see, even though A Song of Ice and Fire doesn't tie into George's other works or his other worlds and his Thousand Worlds saga, there are a lot of those elements that he will reuse over different books, different stories, etc. So perhaps that's why he chose some of these colors, or black and white and red all over could be something that he thought up after creating House Blackwood. We just really don't know. But I just thought it was an interesting tidbit of information. So and just for the listeners out there, I'm suffering from some allergies. So if you hear me clearing my throat or coughing or whatever, I apologize. What were you going to say, Brett?
Oh, usually with George, it's most likely intentional, but who knows?
You never know. You never know. I think that's why he takes so long to write, is because he has these intricate details that he wants to make sure are accurate and pay off. So back to House Blackwood. We know that once they were kings of the rivers during the Age of Heroes. Raventree is located in Blackwood Vale, which is just north of River Run and the Red Fork of the Trident. So they've been in this area a long time. Now, the Blackwoods bury their ancestors and their family members in the village Cairns. That's Cairns, Cairns. While others are buried directly beneath the weirwood tree of Raventree Hall. And we find this out in the Jamie chapter in A Dance with Dragons, when Titus Blackwood's son is to be brought back to River Run to be buried, and Lord Blackwood tells Jamie that he's going to bury him beneath the weirwood, and he also mentions that other family members are buried in the village Cairns. Now, we'll talk a little bit more on this later, because this really significantly ties into the fact that the Blackwoods are first men, and they are first men from the north. And we know that because Maester Barnaby's runic translations and studies of the first men, which are told to us in the World of Ice and Fire, the world book that George and Elio and Linda wrote, tells us that the Blackwoods ruled the Wolf's Wood before being driven from the north by the Kings of Winter. We don't know when that happens, but it was, probably several thousands of years ago. Now, immediately when the Blackwoods are introduced in the story, we know that they have a famous and very bitter feud with House Bracken, dating back somewhere between 500 and 1,000 years before the Andal invasion. Now, the Blackwoods claim that the Brackens were vassal lords and horse breeders serving Blackwood kings, but they rose up, they hired swords, and they usurped House Blackwood. Now, interesting detail here. Micah will have a little bit more about this later. The Blackwoods and the Brackens allied together to fight the Andal invasion, but they are both defeated at the Battle of the Bitter River, which is a river near Blackwood lands and Bracken lands. Now, following the Andal invasion, the Brackens converted to the faith of the Seven, and the Blackwoods kept the old gods, being one of the few houses south of the Neck to retain that ancient faith. Now, we know that the Blackwood weirwood tree at the center of Raventree Hall is stone. It's white. It's dead. And it's dead because we know that the Brackens at some point poisoned that weirwood tree. That's what the Blackwoods accuse them of doing. Now, there have been periods of peace between the two houses. And in fact, Both of these houses produce a bastard called Benedict Rivers, who actually rises to prominence and becomes King Benedict the First Justman, establishing House Justman, a cadet branch of Blackwood, and ruling the kingdom of the Rivers for about 3 centuries. Now, eventually, his line dies out. The last Justman king, King Bernard II, passes away, and House Blackwood and other petty lords in the Riverlands dispute the rule by that house and eventually ally with the Storm King Arlen III Durrandon against Humphrey I Tig, king of the rivers and the hills. Roderick Blackwood was the lord at the time. He was killed in the War of the Six Kings, and his daughter, Shira Blackwood, was his heir, but the lords rejected her proposal to rule, and the Riverlands became part of the realm of the Storm Kings. We see that throughout Georgia's story, that women are often overlooked to rule. Now, as the Riverlands becomes part of the Storm King territories, the kings of the Iron Islands invade, and they actually ally with House Bracken to overthrow the Blackwoods and take control of the region from the Storm King. That kind of ends ancient history of the Blackwoods and the Brackens and the Riverlands, because then we get to the time when the Targaryens arrive and begin to conquer Westeros. Now, when this occurs, House Blackwood actually aids Aegon I and his sisters in opposing House Hoare and King Harren the Black, who we all know famously from Harrenhal. Now, it's important to note that the Blackwoods had continued their petty rivalry with the Brackens, and they were actually very weak at this point. They had a private war with the Brackens. They were very weak, and this actually gives Aegon the idea to raise up House Tully to Lord Paramount of the Trident. Would have been interesting, Again, this goes back to, had their petty grievances been set aside at some point, House Blackwood may have been a really powerful, prominent house. Because throughout the narrative, we know that House Tully, while they're powerful, they have a castle that's out of the way. It's not as big. It's not as strong as some of the other castles. Of course, Riverrun has some really interesting defenses, but we're not here to talk about House Tully. But it is interesting that House Blackwood perhaps could have been the prominent house in the Riverlands had they not been in such a weak position. Now, we're going to fast forward to the Great Council of 101, because the Blackwoods actually during that time support the claim of Laenor Velaryon. The council then chooses Viserys I. We know that Blackwood fights a duel against a Bracken for Princess Rhaenyra's hand, though she ends up choosing Sir Laenor as her husband. Now, the Blackwoods supported the Blacks and Rhaenyra during the dance. They actually fought in the battle by the lakeshore, where Lord Benjacut Blackwood had one of his best archers mercy kill the dragon Tessarion after the Second Battle of Tumbleton. After the Civil War ended, Black Aly Blackwood marries Lord Cregan Stark, and she does that in order to help Lord Corlys Velaryon be removed from prison and pardoned after the death of Aegon II. Lord Corlys had been the longtime hand. And so this is where the Blackwood and Stark blood in the modern story first intersects. Now, again, we're going to talk more about the Blackwoods in the north and the potential for the Starks and the Blackwoods to share some of the common ancestors way back. A Blackwood is very famous for being the sixth mistress of King Aegon IV, Aegon the Unlikely, and that is Lady Melissa Blackwood. And she is actually the mother to the three great bastards, Maya, Gwyneth, and Bloodraven, Lord Brynden Rivers. The Blackwoods were present at the Ashford Meadow tournament in the Hedge Knight. In the Mystery Night, the Blackwoods marched with Lord Bloodraven on white walls to quash the Second Blackfire Rebellion. And the Queen Consort of King Aegon V, Egg from the Dunk and Egg series, was Black Betha Blackwood. And she actually is the great-great-grandmother of Rhaegar, Viserys, and Daenerys, as well as Robert, Stannis, and Renly. Now we've arrived at the main series. Here's what we know about the Blackwoods in the main series. In a Game of Thrones, when Jaime defeats the River Lords and captures Edmure Tully, it is Lord Tytos Blackwood who leads the forces back to River Run. His own seat, Raventree Hall, is taken by the Lannisters. Now, when Robb Stark attacks the Lannisters at the Battle of the Camps, it is Lord Tytos who leads out a sortie from River Run and frees Lord Edmure. Lord Tytos then joins the other lords in naming Robb Stark the King in the North at the end of the first book. In A Clash of Kings, Lord Tytos begins to retake House Blackwood lands, though the Lannisters leave Blackwood Vale scorched and ruined. Maester Luwin actually suggests to Lady Danella Hornwood that she marry a Blackwood, and Tytos' second eldest son, Lucas, accompanies Lady Catelyn Stark to Renly's camp when she treats in the south with Renly and Stannis. In A Storm of Swords, Lord Tytos helps launch Lord Hoster's funeral boat from River Run. Lucas Blackwood is slain by Sir Hostine Frey at the Red Wedding. The Brackens, led by Lord Jonas Bracken, surrender to the Lannisters and join King Joffrey's supporters, attacking Blackwood lands and sieging Raventree Hall. In A Feast for Crows, Blackwood soldiers wash up on the Quiet Isle and are buried next to their Bracken enemy. That's a really interesting symbolism in the fact that these two houses, fighting for thousands and thousands of years, when their men die, what happens? They're all buried in the same soil beside each other. I think George is saying a lot there with that symbolism. Now, in the fifth book, in A Dance with Dragons, with River Run's surrender, Raventree Hall remains the last Stark loyalist stronghold in the South. It's kind of interesting when you think about their First Men ancestors. They keep the faith of the old gods, that they are now the last Stark stronghold in the South.
It's very interesting.
Again, I think a little bit of symbolism there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jaime has marched from River Run, and he arrives at Raventree Hall, where he negotiates a surrender with Lord Tytos, and he takes Hoster Blackwood as a hostage. Lord Jonas Bracken wants most of their lands, but Lord Tytos will only cede certain areas, which Jaime agrees to. So here are the Blackwoods that we know of in the main series. We've mentioned Lord Tytos Blackwood, Lord of Raventree Hall. His children are Brendan Blackwood, his eldest son and heir. He's currently at River Run in the story. We don't get much information on him. Lucas Blackwood, his second son, is slain at the Red Wedding, as we said before, by Hostine Frey. Michael will have something interesting to say about that symbolism there. Hoster Blackwood, called Hoss, is his third son. He's immense. This kid is like almost 7 feet tall, according to the book. He is Jaime's ward at this point, his hostage.
Hoss the hostage, yes.
Hoss the hostage, yeah. That's pretty good. Hoss the hostage. So he is with Jaime at the end of A Dance with Dragons, but he is actually headed to King's Landing. There is Edmund Blackwood, Lord Tytos' fourth son, called Ben. There's Alan Blackwood, his fifth son. And there is Bethany Blackwood, his daughter, who is actually the individual that Lord Jonas suggests to Jaime that Jaime take as a hostage, because Lord Tytos loves Bethany immensely. Jaime does not choose to take her, although we find out Later on, Jamie actually takes a daughter of Lord Jonas, which I think is kind of interesting. That's kind of a fuck you to Lord Jonas. Like, you're going to suggest I take this daughter, or I'm going to take one of your daughters, sir. And then his final son, his sixth son, is Robert Blackwood, and he actually dies just a few days before Jamie arrives at Raventry Hall. So he dies during the siege of Raventry Hall. We know that Lord Titus has two unknown brothers and an unknown sister in the story. He has widowed aunts, nieces, nephews, and cousins. We also know, although we don't know the relationship to Lord Titus or the Blackwood, the main branch of the Blackwoods, we know that Alyssa Blackwood was the fourth wife of old Lord Walder Frey, and she's actually the mother to 5 Freys: Lothar, Jamos, Waylon, Mariah, and Taita. Some of those I've never even fucking heard of, I don't think. Anyways,
yeah.
or I certainly don't remember them.
I mean, it's their phrase. It's fine.
So, that's all we know about the Blackwoods. But like I said in the beginning, they are a really popular house. A lot of people really like them. A lot of people think that they're going to have a part to play, and I want to talk about some of that. I first want to start with that symbolism back to the First Men, and I want to talk about it in the context of what we learn about what they do with their dead. Like I said, we get the fact that the Blackwoods bury their dead either at the village cairns or beneath the weirwood at Raventry Hall. Now, like I said, cairns means a mound of rough stones built as a memorial or a landmark, typically on a hilltop or a skyline. So any of you out there have ever been to Scotland or Ireland, the Celts used, and the ancient Gaels used these mounds of stone to entomb their dead, and they're kind of all over the landscape. And that actually sounds a lot like a barrow, which is famous to the north in A Game of Thrones, in A Song of Ice and Fire. Barrows are actually pretty common in the United States because they were used by the Native Americans some Native American tribes to bury their dead. Actually, we have several here in West Virginia. And I think that that's an interesting tie. I think that shows that the Blackwoods, have a ritual burial that's akin to the North, although perhaps it's adapted a little bit in the South, where perhaps rocks are more plentiful than, these earthen mounds or whatever. The weirwood, burying beneath the weirwood, I think is really interesting. Again, that shows their tie back to the old gods, their tie to sort of the natural order of Westeros, the magical order of Westeros. But to me, it also seems kind of like it's a blood sacrifice. We know from ancient Westerosi history, ancient First Man history, that the First Men sacrificed to the gods of the weirwood, to the old gods. So I kind of wonder if there is something to the fact that they bury beneath the weirwood is kind of a ancient custom that's kind of lost its purpose through thousands of years and is now sort of this modern custom of we bury them there, where 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago it would have been a blood sacrifice before the weirwood tree. So I just think that's kind of interesting.
I think that's the case. I mean, no solid proof, but I mean that's what it sounds like. It just adapted over time.
Yeah,
to what it was.
It makes sense with the Andal invasion. Especially makes sense with the Andals coming in and changing everything, introducing their own culture. Some of that would have been lost to the Blackwoods.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that could have been something that, we know the Blackwoods kept the old gods, but maybe they're like, we maybe we can't sacrifice anymore. We're now surrounded by these houses and these kings, etc., that aren't, are going to look down on it.
Yeah.
Or they could have, that Andal blood could have infused into that first men blood, and somewhere along the way they decide, well, we're going to stop sacrificing people. Let's just bury people here. There's that tie as well.
And it's kind of, what we've seen in, our history, like, or Europe, well, not even European history, all over the world, where, like, these empire, like the biggest empires that have ever existed, they integrated. They didn't. That's why they were successful. They didn't change everything. They just kind of worked them into their system, pretty much.
It's actually the analogy to Ireland that we used before is a perfect example of this, where the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, didn't force the Irish to lose all of their customs. They just adapted many of their customs into the Catholic faith. And actually, the Romans did the same thing with their ancient pagan traditions, their ancient pagan religion. They just transposed it over to Christianity. And, that's a lot of the holidays that we currently have as Christians. And, I'm not speaking as a Christian here, but if you look at the Christian calendar, if you look at some of the Christian customs, a lot of them go back to pagan rituals, pagan traditions, etc., just transposed into the new religion of the state at the time that the Romans adopted. So yeah, that's a good point. Micah, this is where interesting symbolism for sacrificing at the weirwood comes into play, with the fact that Hostine Frey killed Lucas Blackwood at the Red Wedding. Talk about what we could see happening in the Winds of Winter with this.
Yeah. So in a popular theory coming for the Battle of Ice between Stannis' men and the Freys at the Crafters' Village, 3 days march from Winterfell, is that Stannis is going to lure the Freys into a lake, an ice lake that's frozen over, but there's several holes poked into it to where if you run over it, you're going to fall right through if you have a massive army. So with this going on, there's a popular part of the theory is that Stannis could use the weirwood as a torch to lure them in. And so at the head of this charge is going to be Hostine Frey, who will go over the lake and then likely fall straight into the ice and drown. The interesting symbolism coming from this is that the thing that lures Hostine Frey here is a burning weirwood, the sigil to Lucas Blackwood's family, and can be seen as a kind of spiritualistic retribution, so to speak, that Hostine is lured to his death by a weirwood tree, or a blackwood, if you want to think that.
Which is interesting, because if you burn a white weirwood tree, it might be charred black.
It might.
Yeah, I don't know.
Or like the points can be black, or
yeah, it seems intentional.
We haven't really seen a weirwood burn yet, I don't think.
No, I don't
I
think
don't think we have. I mean,
I know they've been chopped down, but
is it said that Stannis burns the one on Dragonstone?
Oh, I think he did.
It does, but I don't think it
said, but we never see it, right?
Yeah,
we never see it,
or it's never described, at least.
Well, what's interesting about this theory, the night lamp theory, as the overall theory, as Micah was saying, that the beacon fire at the top of the tower would be turned off and the weirwood would be lighted, thus the phrase thinking, okay, here's Stannis's tower that we're charging toward, except we're charging across the lake. The symbolism to me is the Blackwood weirwood is dead. It's white, it's described as kind of a.
Uh-oh. We lost him. Hold on one second. Let's see.
Blackwood ghosts went and gone.
Yeah. Let me.
Okay, I'm not sure what happened there.
Oh, okay. Cool.
All of a sudden, I just got the video call has ended.
Okay. I think your last sentence was what was interesting to you.
Yeah. So what was interesting to me is that the Blackwood weirwood is dead. It's described as going white. It's almost like stone. It's dying. A weirwood tree on fire is alive. That to me is kind of the ice and fire symbolism. That ice in George's story is death. It's the others. It's representative of the world stopping. Fire is life. Fire brings Dany's dragons back. Fire, the fire god, R'hllor, etc., is going to probably bring Jon Snow back. Fire is what you huddle around to survive the winter, etc. So the Blackwood weirwood on fire in the north, drawing in the phrase to their icy death. I think that's just really strong symbolism that George could be using too. And again, it's these type of things that George wants to latch onto and wants to say, all right, this, I'm going to reward my readers and the folks out there because I've put so much thought and time and effort into this. And I think that's why this is a really great theory, that the phrase who killed Lucas Blackwood, Hostine Freya in particular, is going to charge to his death racing toward a weirwood. I just think it's really, really good. And I think it's symbolism that George just loves for his books.
When I just love the whole just this whole theory of the lake and
it's a great theory.
And any other theory that like kind of piggybacks off of it is just and it works is just I'm a fan.
It's like putting like multiple cherries on top of a sundae. Just like keep them coming. Like keep all of this adding to this because this theory is just so great.
It is.
All right. So I want to talk about Lord Tytos himself. Actually, let's jump to something else. Let's talk about the fact that we don't know the house words of House Blackwood. And I want to get your all's take if you think it will be revealed, and if it is, what do you think it could mean? I'll just share a couple ideas that fans have had over the years, and these seem to be the two most prominent that I've found. One is messengers of the gods, which I think kind of ties back to the fact that the ravens come every night into Raventree Hall and just roost there. You've got the weirwood tree again that is the symbol of both the house, but also the prominent fixture of this castle. I mean, Jaime sees this tree for miles before he gets to Raventree Hall. It's just immense. It's absolutely immense. He notes that the one at Casterly Rock is just minuscule compared to this tree. So messengers of the gods, that's one that fans speculate. The second one, which I think is much better, is our strength gathers. Again, that to me makes it seem like the ravens coming in at night, just kind of just gathering there, waiting. I think that's symbolism for the North as well. That the North is coming back. The North is going to either get revenge, take over, become one of the dominant kingdoms in the end.
It sounds a lot like just the moral of the story too. Like you got the others, they're gathering, Dany's gathering, the free cities are gathering. I don't know.
I think that's pretty good. Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah. Another point for Our Strength Gathers is an important thing when considering the house words is that most of the time George puts them in a way to where it symbolizes the family and not just like reason a messenger of the gods doesn't sound quite, it's a good one, but it doesn't sound quite as epic as Our Strength Gathers, as a messenger of the gods sounds very singular and very contained, whereas Our Strength Gathers is this whole thing. Like ours is the fury, unbowed, unbent, unbroken.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I like that. Yeah, we don't sow. Yeah. Or we do not sow.
Our Strength Gathers also makes me think a lot of like the North Remembers. Like those seem to be in a lot of the same respects. It's the same, as you said, Micah. It has a much larger meaning, and it also applies to the Blackwoods itself. It's kind of that you can read it in multiple ways. So again, this is just fan conjecture. We do not know. I assume we might find out, but there's a lot of houses out there that we don't know their words.
And if Winds of Winter comes out and this is all completely wrong, it's a possibility. It could happen.
Right. Well, and I think another interesting thing about the Blackwoods and specific to Lord Tytos is that raven cloak that he wears. That's a really cool detail that George has come up with. But it's also very prophetic for their ties to the old gods, their ties to the ravens. And I think has some foreshadowing of King Bran as well. You could see a cloak like this being something that Bran wears at the end of the story, or an old King Bran is, kind of under this cloak of raven's feathers. We know from the show's ending, it didn't get a lot of direct attention on screen, but if you go back and you look, Bran adopted a new sigil for himself, which featured a raven prominently.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see something like that being you can kind of see a situation where at a kind of a great council choosing Bran in the end or whatever, that Lord Tytos takes off that cloak and gives it to him, or something like that.
Allegiance, that could be interesting.
I'm curious to know, like, I want to find out more about why the Blackwoods traveled south, because it's like a opposite or reverse of the Manderleys. So I wonder if there's a lot of similarities there, like if it's ever revealed. I just thought that was an interesting thing I've noticed. They seem, I don't know, they seem like they should be tied more, but.
Well, no, I think you're right. There's, we don't know specifically why they were driven out, but we know they were driven out. Again, like you said, that's just like the Manderleys. The Manderleys were driven from the south to the north.
Yeah.
Well, and I wonder, driven from the north to the south.
Well, and I wonder if White Harbor, it was when the Wolf's Den. But I wonder, maybe that could have been Blackwood land and they switched.
Well, I think the Blackwoods leave much earlier.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, the Manderleys.
Well, they would have to if the I don't know. I'm just snowballing. But
no. But it's stated that the Blackwoods ruled the Wolfswood, which we know is just to the north of Winterfell, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's northwest.
So
okay. So they weren't. They're not in the same area.
Yeah. So they're kind of on the not the other side, but almost the other side of the north.
Hmm.
Yeah, and the Manderleys, they're thrown out like after the Andal invasion, like a 1,000 years, I think, before the Targaryens came, or something like that. There's somewhere around there. But let's talk.
It is. Yeah.
Let's talk real quick about that parallel, the fact that the Blackwoods were driven out. We don't know why. It's probably that they sided against whoever at the time the Kings of Winter were, which I assume were the Starks, and they were driven south. But I just want to bring up this interesting parallel, and it's something that I noted on Twitter. The Brackens and the Blackwoods have this thousands of years feud. I mean, it's still going on. And we'll talk a little bit more about how it might end. We'll theorize a little bit about how it might end. But, it's been happening since the beginning of time, basically. Now, the interesting thing here is that the Bracken sigil is very similar to the sigil of House Riswell of the North. The house that rules the Rills. That's an area just kind of southwest in the north. So it's just a little north of the neck, just near the Barrow lands. And their sigil is a stallion. And the Bracken sigil is a stallion. And it's noted that House Riswell, or Riswell, however you pronounce it, actually inherits rule of the Rills from House Ryder. House Ryder is a house that goes extinct because they rose up against the Kings of Winter. So is it possible that the Brackens are descended from House Ryder and they fled the north and they just kind of flipped their sigil around a little bit and found a place down south, and they were like, oh, here's our old friends, the Blackwoods. We're just going to set up shop right beside them, and we're going to continue our feud that we've had for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. There's really no evidence to prove this. I just think it's an interesting parallel that if the Blackwoods were driven from the north, perhaps the Brackens were too. So what do you guys think about that?
I feel like the feud is that petty that they would do something like that, like just because it just seems like there's a lot of pettiness going on. So yeah, I like it. Yeah, even if there's not.
That's our favorite tinfoil theory now.
Yeah, I mean, even if there's not any evidence, I still love it so much. Like, there's a little bit there, but
yeah,
nothing
call
solid.
It tinfoil, Micah, but there's so much better tinfoil out there. Like, don't. Put
I know.
Head. This is like one that you're like, oh, okay, and then people are like, okay, I don't okay, well, all right, great, maybe, but
yeah.
Anyways, yeah, that's just a little thought I had that I thought was kind of interesting because, like Brett said, these people are so petty that you could see them being like, well, all right, well, the Blackwoods moved here. We're going to move to the other side of this valley and just restart our bitter feud with them.
Then you get
all right, so
bitter still.
Let's end the episode by talking about where the Blackwoods are going in the Winds of Winter and beyond. Again, we know that Lord Tytos has just surrendered to the Lannisters. He has kneeled, even though Jaime doesn't technically make him kneel. He is back in the King's Peace. The siege that the Brackens are forcing upon Blackwood land and Raventree Hall has ended. Lord Tytos' son, Hoss, is now a ward of the Lannisters, a hostage of the Lannisters. So let's talk first about what could happen in the Riverlands with the Blackwoods, with Lady Stoneheart, the Brotherhood Without Banners, the Lannister forces that are still in the area. Some of them are getting ready to leave the area. They're getting ready to leave River Run for Casterly Rock with Edmure Tully and Jane Westerling. So there could be a lot going on there. Michael, what do you think is going to happen with the Blackwoods and the Riverlands?
I don't think with the Riverlands right away, I don't think they'll do much. But if Stoneheart gets word over to the Blackwoods saying we're gonna do a Red Wedding Revenge over here in Riverrun, doing like Gavin's wedding date. If you guys want to come in and join, Tytos could do a repeat of what he did in A Game of Thrones when he rescued Edmure out of Riverrun. He could get some people out of there again. Some people that Stoneheart shouldn't have killed, such as maybe all the Frey kids that are going to be at the wedding, or anyone else. Or Tytos could venture out and rescue Edmure from before he reaches Casterly Rock. I'm not sure if Tytos can do that much, considering he's a prisoner, though, or his son is a prisoner.
I don't really have much. I'm not really sure in that specific time period, but something that I always think back to is how the first Dance of the Dragons was really, or not Dance of the Dragons, Blackfire Rebellions was really fueled by a Blackfire, or is really fueled by the Brackens and the Blackwoods. And I'm just thinking, I feel like they're going to have maybe a part to play, and if there's a second Dance of the Dragons. I don't know how big of a part, but I feel like they're going to find themselves at odds again.
Yeah, I think we'll see that.
I feel like they'll make it to that at least. So I feel like they're going to survive whatever craziness goes on in the Riverlands up until the second Dance of the Dragons, if that theory comes true.
Yeah. There is an interesting theory that comes from Jaime's chapter in A Dance with Dragons, and that it's the only Jaime chapter in A Dance with Dragons. Again, it's the one where he marches on Raventree Hall. There is a camp follower that Lord Jonas is fucking when Jaime enters the tent, and her name is Hildy. And she is very inquisitive of Jaime. She asks a lot of questions. 3 or 4 times, Lord Jonas tells her to leave. She sticks around, just saying these strange things to Jaime. She grabs Jaime's cock. She does all these weird things. She runs away giggling. That has led some folks to believe that she's not just a camp follower or a sex worker or a tavern wench or whatever. I mean, she could be one of those things. But some people are theorizing that she's a spy for the Brotherhood Without Banners. So one of the interesting things is that Jaime, when the chapter opens, he is surprised that the marching from Riverrun to Raventree Hall has not been hard. It's been very easy. He has been expecting an attack by the Brotherhood Without Banners. And we know Jaime doesn't know this, but when he leaves Riverrun, he leaves Thomas Seven Strings, who is an informant for the Brotherhood Without Banners, with Edmure. So it's quite possible that Hildy was sent as a spy, or she was someone who went before Jaime to Raventree Hall, or she received information. Because what happens at the end of Jaime's chapter is he marches to Pennytree, and at Pennytree, he decides to camp. Everyone, all of the villagers, if they are villagers, they actually might be some members of the Brotherhood Without Banners, the theory goes, are inside the fortification in Pennytree. He just decides to camp there in Pennytree. Well, as soon as night falls, Brienne arrives, and we know that Brienne was sent by Lady Stoneheart. So the theory goes that Hildy is a spy. And if she's spying for the Brotherhood Without Banners, as soon as the Brackens left, she probably either made a beeline for Lord Tytos or got word to Lord Tytos that, hey, this is what's going down. You just need to sit tight. The Brotherhood Without Banners is coming, and we need your help to retake the Riverlands or do whatever. So, yeah, I definitely think they're going to be tied to whatever happens to the Riverlands very soon.
It's one of those things. It's like, I definitely think, yeah, I think she is a spy, but it's one of those things that kind of like the chapter kind of lingers on her and her dialogue, and usually when that happens, George is trying to either make a point or this is a character you should really pay attention to, especially if they have a lot of dialogue and they're doing a lot of stuff within that chapter. So that, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to at least pay attention to her.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the coming second Dance of the Dragons. And we know it's already sort of underway in Westeros, in the fact that Aegon VI, or Fagon, or Young Grith, whatever you want to refer to him as, has landed with the Golden Company in the Stormlands. They are taking castles. They are already in Storm's End. I think by the time one of Arianne's chapters happens, sample chapters happens in the Winds of Winter. And we know that the Blackwoods participated in the Dance of the Dragons. They sided with the Blacks. So where do you think, Micah, we'll start with you, where do you think they're going to come down in the Dance of the Dragons, the second Dance of the Dragons, being between Aegon VI and Daenerys? Do they stay out of it? How do you think that occurs?
I think it'll be a mix because, again, Blackwood and Bracken both have hostages in King's Landing. And it kind of depends on where those two fly when Aegon takes King's Landing. Is he going to keep those hostages there? Is one family going to turn to him? I think Bracken might do that. In which case he would let his hostage for Bracken go. If young Aegon would have to be the one to make that decision, he would be rash enough to do that. Or they could both be there, and we may end up seeing Bracken and Blackwood not necessarily fighting for or against Aegon, but more like each other. They could be squaring up from across the river, where you would see like I imagine it as a cartoon, where you'd see like the one river and then the two lands that look exactly the same, but you got Blackwoods on one side and Bracken's on the other, and they're both basically just yelling at each other. I could see that happening for them during the dance, and then probably towards the end of it, with whatever happens to Hoster and the hostage from Bracken, they would probably start duking it out, depending on what happens to either of the hostages.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like it'd be really ironic. I mean, you already got the Golden Company supporting. Oh, well, no, they didn't. Never mind. They were going to support Dany, but they went with Fagon.
Yeah.
So there's that. I just thought it might be ironic if the Blackwoods somehow ended up supporting Fagon and the Brackens, Daenerys. But I don't know. I don't really have a lot to say about it. I just, I guess I'm just going to wait to see what happens.
Yeah, it's difficult to say what's going to happen with them before the others show up, because something you mentioned in our last recording, Travis, is that Blackwood and Bracken, their feud is Westeros writ small, as you said.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because you have the Blackwoods being of the old gods and of that. They're related to the old magic, whereas Bracken is more on that political angle. They have the horse as their sigil, which is more on the feudal side of it, and they're always fighting each other, and then the others are going to show up and say, hey, we're the actual threat, and you just wink into yourselves, you fools.
Right. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, they are, and just beyond the magical and political fighting each other, they are Westeros writ small because of just petty grievance, just one backstabs the other poisons this tree, the other one kills this person's heir, the other one sides with this king against, it just keeps going on and on and on. It's a lot like Tyrion's quote where he's talking about this, the sins of the generation before them and the generation before them, and et cetera, that just keeps the wheel spinning. That is why Blackwood and Bracken are so representative of what's wrong with Westeros. But you're right that they also have that magical political difference that defines them as well. One of the interesting things that I think about the second Dance of the Dragons is, like you said, what happens to their hostages. And the same is true for Bracken. Lord Bracken is sending one of his daughters to King's Landing. So you're going to have a Blackwood and a Bracken in King's Landing. So the first thing that comes to mind is one's a boy and one's a girl. Perhaps they fall in love and they're the ones that kind of end this infighting. But they're hostages of the Lannisters. There's a lot of shit getting ready to go down in King's Landing, even before Fagon gets there or Daenerys gets there. What happens to them with Cersei back as queen? What happens to them with the faith? All of these things. Then you have the fact that Fagon potentially, most fans believe this, but potentially is going to take King's Landing. Do they then become his hostages? And if they become his hostages, do the Blackwoods and the Brackens support him versus Dany? If Dany nukes the city or accidentally burns the city, those hostages are potentially gone, which could, just continue the Blackwoods and the Brackens being against her or, siding against her.
That's interesting because if Fagon takes the city and kind of orders the marriage to happen to unite them so he can have an ally with them both, but then Dany comes in, destroys the city, killing the hostages, are the Blackwoods and Brackens still united because against a common enemy? That is Daenerys at that time. So I could see potentially them kind of ending the feud through through a horrible tragedy that, or the cycle could continue.
Right.
But I mean,
Seems pretty funny.
yeah, I mean, I kind of like that. I mean, I guess I just came up with it in my mind, but I'm sure it's been thought of, but yeah, I don't know. I kind of like it.
Yeah, and I think the one other thing that calls into question what happens to the Blackwoods going forward is Rob's will.
True, yeah.
The hostage is very important. Like that's going to define a lot of what Lord Tytos does going forward. But if he helps Lady Stoneheart or the Brotherhood Without Banners or Edmure Tully retake the Riverlands, then he's technically already violated the King's peace. So he's kind of already sacrificed his son to, I can't do anything about this. I got to retake my lands. I got to retake the Riverlands.
True.
If he helps to retake the Riverlands, are they retaking it? Is Edmure Tully declaring himself King of the Rivers? Or is he going back to a joint kingdom of the North and the rivers? If that's the case, are they following Jon Snow because of Robb's will? I mean, all of these things, again, there's just so much that could happen with just these minor houses that make them so fascinating because, we've been talking this whole episode about their tie to the old gods in the North. Maybe the threat of the others or the fact that they want to help Jon Snow retake the North or something. Maybe the Blackwoods say, you know what, we're going to march north. I mean, there's just so many possibilities that I think is just really fascinating of where their story could end.
Yeah, I mean, you could potentially see them fleeing north again,
You could. Yeah, you could see them going back north. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting parallel we could draw from in their history from two specific events. One being the Andal invasion. During that time, the Blackwoods and Brackens actually fought together but lost. We could see a repeat of this if the others show up, or when the others show up. They could come down that far eventually, and I think they will. And we could see the Blackwoods and Brackens both turning their swords to the others in an attempt to fight them off. And the other event being that, going back to Robb's will, Tytos was a loyal follower of Robb. So if Jon comes south and says, hey, we need to join up and not argue amongst each other because we got ice zombies behind me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they fought with Robb and lost together too. I mean, which, that's, so there's two instances of them actually working together and losing. So it's not out of the question that they'll do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, third time's the charm. But the other main parallel that I noticed while Travis was reading out the history is that King Benedict Justman, or Benedict Rivers as he was called, he was a bastard king who brought Blackwood and Bracken together. We could see that happen again if Jon becomes king of the North and goes down south. If he's the one to unite them and focus their attention from fighting amongst each other to fighting the greater threat that needs to be fought.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I do like the idea that regardless of what happens in the Winds of Winter, potentially their end in A Dream of Spring is fighting there along the Bitter River against the others, and actually potentially winning the fight against the others there. If the others get that far south, I think that's a great parallel that George, would probably like to use if he could. If he could put a little segment in there where someone's talking, Blackwood and Bracken forces met the enemy at the Bitter River and repelled them or whatever. Just make for a nice little like, oh, okay, wait, and then us fans would go back and say,
that's one of the cool little things that he does is that, like with Lucas Blackwood, if Lucas Blackwood is mentioned offhand numerous times, and Hostine dying at the Weirwood Tree could be one of those things normally you would catch up on reread, but because we got so much time to think about the books, we're all thinking of them before.
All right, so I want to close out the episode on the Blackwoods with this quote because, again, this gets back to the microcosm of Blackwood and Bracken being Westeros writ small. And this is said by Hoster Blackwood to Jaime Lannister in Jaime's chapter in A Dance of Dragons. We've had 100 pieces with the Brackens, many sealed with marriages. There's Blackwood blood in every Bracken and Bracken blood in every Blackwood. The old king's peace lasted half a century, but then some fresh quarrel broke out and the old wounds opened and began to bleed again. That's how it always happens, my father says. So long as men remember the wrongs done to their forebears, no peace will ever last. So we go on century after century with us hating the Brackens and them hating us. My father says there will never be an end to it. And again, that is what has happened in Westeros for thousands and thousands of years. It what continues to haunt mankind for millions of years even. And I think that will be interesting if at the end of this, if the Brackens and the Blackwoods are able to finally find peace, could it be negotiated by King Bran? Could it be Hoster, Blackwood, and whatever daughter Jonas Bracken sends to King's Landing? Could it be love that they find for each other that kind of brings those two houses together? I think that's interesting, and I think that will be one of those potentially bittersweet things that we'll see at the end of the series that says, okay, Westeros is going to change. We know it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be, a flip of the switch, a snap of the finger, and everything goes good. But there's a little bit of hope. There's a little bit of silver lining that says things are going to be better than they were. And so I think that the Blackwoods and Brackens could definitely be could have potential for really showcasing how things are going to improve in Westeros.
I couldn't agree more, especially with the state of our current world. Hopefully, hopefully there's a silver lining to it all.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have to have some ice zombies show up to really put the nail in the coffin.
Put the nail in the coffin. Yeah,
No,
to
no.
prove to everyone, okay, we need to get along.
Yeah. I don't know if we'd make it, but
We probably wouldn't. At all. All right, well, that does it for our discussion on House Blackwood, one of the more interesting houses in A Song of Ice and Fire. We thank you for visiting and for listening. Please rate and review us on iTunes and other podcast platforms. Follow us on Twitter at Planetos Podcasts, Facebook, Instagram. We can't thank you all enough for listening to us. We're so glad to be back, and we hope that each of you out there are staying safe and staying healthy and looking out for each other. So until we see you again, we'll see you around Planetos. Good night.
good night.
I'm going.